Once upon a time, in the lively town of Onitsha, there lived a woman named Ugochi. She was a beautiful and kind woman, but her heart was heavy with sorrow. For 10 long years, she had prayed to God for a child. Every day, she knelt by her bed, her hands clasped tightly. "God, please bless me with a child," she whispered, her voice filled with hope. Her husband, Chidi, loved her dearly. He would hold her hand and say, "Ugochi, don't lose hope. God's time is the best time." But as the years went by, the townspeople began to talk. "Why hasn't Ugochi given birth yet? Maybe she's cursed," they whispered behind her back. One bright morning, Ugochi woke up with a strange feeling. Her stomach felt heavy and her body was warm. She quickly ran to her husband. "Chidi, I think I'm pregnant," she exclaimed, her eyes sparkling like the morning sun. Chidi couldn't believe his ears. "Are you sure, Ugochi?" he asked, his voice trembling with excitement. "Yes, I feel it in my body," she said, tears of joy streaming down her face. From that moment, the couple's happiness knew no bounds. Ugochi sang as she cooked, her voice as sweet as a bird's melody. Chidi worked harder than ever, preparing for the arrival of their child. Months passed, and Ugochi's belly grew big like a ripe melon. The whole town celebrated with them. "Ugochi will soon carry her own child," they said, smiling. Finally, the day came. The midwives gathered in Ugochi's house as she went into labor. Her cries filled the air like the sound of a drumbeat. "Push, Ugochi, push," the midwives encouraged her. With one last cry, the sound of a baby's wail echoed in the room. "It's a boy," the midwife announced, lifting the baby high. The townspeople outside cheered, clapping their hands and singing. "Ugochi has given birth. God has answered her prayers." But as the baby cried, Ugochi's breathing slowed. She looked at her son with a weak smile. "Nonso, that's his name," she whispered. Then she closed her eyes, her face peaceful like the setting sun as she passed away. "Ugochi, Ugochi, wake up," Chidi shouted, shaking her gently. But Ugochi didn't move. The room grew quiet, and the joy of the moment turned into sorrow. Chidi held his newborn son tightly, tears streaming down his face. "Why, God? Why take her now?" he cried. The townspeople mourned with him. "She prayed for this child and now she's gone," they said, their voices heavy with sadness. Chidi buried Ugochi the next day, the sound of the funeral drum filling the air. As he stood by her grave, holding little Nonso in his arms, he whispered, "Ugochi, I will take care of him. I promise." But life didn't stop for Chidi. He had to be strong. With a baby to raise and a heart full of pain, he knew he had to keep moving forward. The sun rose and set, and each day brought new challenges. But Chidi held on to Ugochi's memory, vowing to give Nonso the life she would have wanted for him. 3 months after Ugochi's burial, Chidi made a decision that surprised the entire town. He married Amaka, a young and energetic woman. The townspeople couldn't stop talking. How could he move on so quickly? Did he already have feelings for her before Ugochi's death? They whispered. But Chidi didn't let their words bother him. He was a man with responsibilities, and he couldn't raise Nonso alone. Amaka was exactly what he needed. Kind, hardworking, and ready to step into the role of a mother. "I will love this boy like my own," Amaka said, her voice firm and determined. To her, Nonso wasn't just a stepson. He was an opportunity to build something meaningful in the family. The day she arrived at their home, Amaka took Nonso in her arms. "You're my son now," she said, planting a kiss on his forehead. Nonso, still too young to understand, simply stared at her with wide eyes. Chidi watched them from the corner of the room, his heart heavy. He missed Ugochi deeply, but he knew this was the best choice for Nonso. The house, which had felt empty since Ugochi's passing, began to fill with laughter again. Amaka sang while she worked, her voice lifting the mood like sunlight breaking through dark clouds. The townspeople continued to gossip, but Chidi kept his head high. He focused on his son and new wife, determined to rebuild their lives. Amaka, for her part, was eager to prove that she wasn't just a replacement, but a real mother to Nonso. Amaka threw herself into motherhood with vigor. She wanted to prove to everyone that she wasn't just some opportunist, but a genuine caretaker. She fed him his favorite meals, wrapped him tightly in blankets at night, and carried him on her back when he cried. "You'll never feel lonely, my boy," she whispered to him one evening as he lay in her arms. Nonso, though still young, clung to her like a baby monkey to its mother. Whenever Nonso cried, Amaka rushed to his side. If he refused to eat, she would sit by him patiently, coaxing him with sweet words until he smiled. When he threw tantrums, kicking his tiny legs and screaming, she would lift him up and rock him until he calmed down. "Amaka, this is too much," Chidi said one evening as he watched her fuss over Nonso, who had just refused to eat his vegetables. "You're spoiling this boy." Amaka barely glanced at him. "He lost his real mother." "Chidi," she replied, her voice firm, "I won't let him feel that void." "But how will he grow?" Chidi asked, shaking his head. "He's learning to depend on you for everything." Amaka brushed him off, smiling softly as she wiped Nonso's face. "A child needs love, not discipline. He's still too small." Days turned into weeks and weeks into years. Nonso grew up believing that Amaka's love was endless. If he fell, she picked him up before he could cry. If he wanted a toy, she made sure he got it. "Mama Amaka will always take care of you," she often said, stroking his cheek. By the time Nonso could talk and walk confidently, he had learned that all he had to do was call for Amaka, and she would come running. If he wanted something, she would give it to him. "Mama, I don't want to eat this," he would say, pushing his plate away. "It's okay, my boy," Amaka would reply, setting the plate aside. "What would you like instead?" Chidi watched in silence, his concern growing. "You'll regret this one day, Amaka," he warned again, his tone serious. But Amaka only smiled, her hands busy tying Nonso's shoelaces. To her, Nonso was her son, and nothing was too much to give him. Under Amaka's care, Nonso grew up believing that the world revolved around him. Amaka's love was a soft cushion, shielding him from the smallest discomforts. But even the strongest cushions wear thin with time, and the boy who was taught to lean on his mother for everything would soon grow into someone who never learned to stand on his own. By the time Nonso turned 7, his attachment to Amaka was glaringly unhealthy. He refused to play with other children, preferring to shadow Amaka wherever she went. If she laughed at one of Chidi's jokes, Nonso would pout or interrupt, demanding her attention. And since he was a toddler, Amaka had been bathing him right after she bathed in the same bathroom. So literally, they'd been bathing together even till now when Nonso was 7. One day, after returning from her bath, Amaka walked into her bedroom to find Nonso sprawled on her bed. She was still in her towel, but she thought nothing of it. "My boy, how are you?" she asked, sitting beside him. "Mama," he said, tilting his head. "What's that?" He pointed at her chest, his face innocent and filled with curiosity. Amaka laughed, thinking it was harmless. "These are mine, Nonso," she said, brushing it off. "Every woman has them." Nonso nodded, his eyes wide. "They're big. Can I touch them?" Without thinking, Amaka allowed it, her mind still in the haze of motherly love. "He's just a child," she thought, smiling as he giggled. "It's nothing." But Nonso's questions didn't stop there. Days later, as she dried him off again, he asked, "Mama, why does your chest move when you walk?" Amaka laughed again, patting his cheek. "Oh, Nonso, you're so funny." To her, they were innocent questions. But to Chidi, who noticed Nonso's behavior during family meals and conversations, the alarm bells were ringing. "Amaka," he said one evening, his tone serious, "this boy is not behaving like other children his age. You need to set boundaries." "He's just curious," Amaka replied, waving him off. "All children ask questions." Chidi shook his head. "Not like this. You're making him too comfortable." But Amaka didn't listen. She believed her love and openness were what Nonso needed. What she didn't realize was that seeds had been planted, seeds that would grow into something neither of them could have imagined. As Nonso entered his teenage years, his behavior grew more concerning. At school, he was rude to male teachers and hostile toward any boy who spoke to girls. But at home, he remained fiercely attached to Amaka, always seeking her attention. One day, the family's neighbor, Mr. Ez, commented on Amaka's beauty during a casual conversation. "Ah, Amaka, you're glowing more and more every day," he said. Before Amaka could respond, Nonso stormed out of the house. His face was twisted with anger, and his fists were clenched. "Don't talk to her like that," Nonso shouted, stepping in front of Amaka as if to shield her. "Nonso!" Amaka exclaimed, shocked. "What are you doing? Apologize to Mr. Ease." But Nonso stood firm, glaring at the older man. "I won't let anyone talk to Mama that way," he said, his voice low and threatening. Mr. Ease, startled, raised his hands in surrender. "It's all right, Amaka. He's just being protective," he said with a nervous laugh before walking away. Amaka turned to Nonso, her brows furrowed. "What's wrong with you? That was rude." Nonso's expression softened. "I don't like the way he looked at you," he muttered. "You're my mama." Amaka sighed, shaking her head, but inside, she felt a strange mix of pride and confusion. "He loves me too much," she thought. "But it's because I've always been there for him." That evening, Chidi came home and heard about the incident. "Amaka, this boy is acting like you're his wife, not his mother," he said bluntly. Amaka waved him off. "Chidi, you're exaggerating. He's just protective, that's all." But Chidi wasn't convinced. He had noticed the way Nonso's eyes followed Amaka everywhere, the way he interrupted their conversations or frowned when Chidi tried to be affectionate with her. "You need to set boundaries," he said firmly. "You're encouraging this behavior without even realizing it." Amaka folded her arms. "I've raised him to love and protect his family. That's all this is. You're reading too much into it." Chidi shook his head, his frustration growing. "You'll regret ignoring this, Amaka. Mark my words." Days later, Nonso's behavior grew even more alarming. If Amaka laughed at one of Chidi's jokes, Nonso would scowl and find a way to interrupt. At church, when a man greeted Amaka with a warm smile, Nonso shot him a glare that could freeze water. It was as though he saw every man who spoke to her as a rival. "Mama, why do you let people talk to you like that?" Nonso asked one evening, his voice tinged with jealousy. "What do you mean, Nonso?" Amaka replied, surprised. "You're too kind to them," Nonso said firmly. "They don't deserve it." Amaka chuckled, brushing it off. "You're too protective, my boy. I'm just being polite." But to Nonso, it wasn't about politeness. He saw Amaka as his, and the thought of anyone else being close to her made his blood boil. Chidi watched helplessly as his warnings continued to fall on deaf ears. Amaka believed Nonso's behavior was rooted in love. But what she didn't realize was that love, when left unchecked, was beginning to twist into something dangerous. But one night, something terrible happened. Amaka had just finished her bath, her skin damp and glowing under the dim light of the hallway. She stepped out of the bathroom, clutching her towel, when she noticed a shadow near the corner of the door. "Nonso?" she called, her voice sharp but controlled. Nonso stepped forward, his eyes wide like a child caught stealing sweets. "Mama," he said hesitantly, "I just wanted to see you." Amaka's brows furrowed. "See me? Why are you standing there? You should be in bed," she said, her tone stern but not angry. Nonso fidgeted, his head lowered. "I couldn't sleep. I thought I'd wait for you." Amaka sighed, her heart softening. "Nonso, you're too old to be wandering around like this. Go to your room." "Yes, Mama," he mumbled, walking away. But his lingering gaze didn't go unnoticed. Later that night, as Amaka lay in bed, she thought about the incident. Her heart felt uneasy, but she brushed it off. "He's still just a boy," she told herself. "It's nothing." But it wasn't nothing. Over the following weeks, Nonso's behavior became more unsettling. One night, Amaka woke up to find him standing by her bed. "Nonso," she gasped, sitting up. "What are you doing here?" "I can't sleep, Mama," he whispered, his voice soft. "Can I stay here with you?" Amaka hesitated, but eventually nodded. "Just for tonight," she said, pulling the blanket over herself. Nonso climbed onto the bed, lying close to her. His presence felt strange, but Amaka convinced herself it was harmless. "He's just going through a phase," she thought. "He'll grow out of it." But Nonso didn't grow out of it. His visits became more frequent. Each time, he had a new excuse. "Mama, I had a nightmare," he would say. Or, "Mama, I don't like sleeping alone." Amaka's unease grew, but she couldn't bring herself to push him away. She remembered how he had lost his real mother and how she had promised to fill that void. Maybe he just needs more love, she reasoned. Chidi, however, noticed the change. One morning, he asked Amaka, "Why does Nonso keep sneaking into your room?" "He's just having trouble sleeping," Amaka replied, avoiding his gaze. Chidi frowned. "Amaka, this isn't normal. You need to stop letting him do that." Amaka waved him off. "It's nothing, Chidi. He's still young." But Chidi's warning echoed in her mind, especially as Nonso's boldness grew. One evening, after Amaka had taken her bath, she caught Nonso peeking through the crack of the bathroom door. Her heart raced as she tightened her towel. "Nonso!" she shouted. "What are you doing?" Startled, Nonso stammered. I just wanted to ask you something." Amaka's voice trembled. "You can't stand here like this. Go to your room." Nonso walked away, but his actions left her shaken. She wanted to believe it was harmless, that it was just the curiosity of a growing boy. But deep down, a voice whispered that something was wrong. Amaka ignored it, thinking her love and patience would fix everything. What she didn't realize was that her silence was allowing a dangerous seed to grow. Over the weeks, Nonso's behavior escalated further when he began pulling Amaka's clothes as she slept. One night, Amaka woke with a start to find Nonso tugging at her nightgown. "Nonso, what is wrong with you?" she screamed, leaping out of bed. "Mama, I can't help it," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "You're so beautiful. I love you more than anyone else." Amaka backed away, her heart pounding. "Nonso, I'm your mother. This is not love. This is wrong. You're not my real mother, he said, his tone bitter. You're the only one who cares about me, and I know you feel the same way. Without wasting another moment, she picked up her phone and called Chidi, who was away on a business trip. Her voice shook as she spoke. Chidi, you need to come home. Nonso, he's not okay. I can't handle this anymore. Chidi's voice was heavy with concern. What happened, Amaka? Just come home, she whispered, her voice breaking. Please. The next day, Chidi returned, his face grave as Amaka recounted everything. He listened in silence, his hands clenched into fists. When she finished, he stood up and said, This ends now. Nonso needs help, and he needs to be away from here. Amaka nodded, tears in her eyes. What will we do? She asked softly. We'll send him to boarding school, Chidi said firmly. He needs structure, he needs discipline, and he needs to understand boundaries. Nonso was called into the living room that evening. Chidi's voice was calm but stern. Nonso, you'll be leaving for boarding school tomorrow, he said. Nonso's eyes widened in shock. No, you can't take me away from Mama, he shouted, his voice breaking. This isn't up for debate, Chidi replied. You've crossed the line, Nonso. You need help, and this is the only way. Nonso turned to Amaka, his face filled with desperation. Mama, don't let him send me away. I'll be good, I promise. But Amaka couldn't meet his gaze. She turned away, her heart heavy but resolute. Nonso's cries echoed through the house, but the decision had been made. The next morning, as he was driven away, Amaka stood at the window, tears streaming down her face. She knew this was the right thing to do, but her heart ached with the weight of it all. For Chidi and Amaka, it felt like the first step toward reclaiming their family. But for Nonso, it was the beginning of a new kind of darkness. Despite Nonso's protests, Chidi enrolled him in a boarding school far from home. When Nonso was sent to boarding school, Chidi and Amaka hoped it would provide the structure he needed to overcome his troubling behavior. At first, the reports from the school were promising. Nonso seemed quiet, obedient, and reserved. However, this was merely a facade. Beneath the surface, Nonso's resentment festered. In his second term, Nonso befriended a group of older boys notorious for their bad behavior. Led by a cunning and manipulative senior named Uchi, the group had a reputation for skipping classes, bullying, and sneaking out of school. Uche quickly noticed Nonso's vulnerability and began drawing him into their circle. At first, Nonso resisted, but loneliness pushed him into Uche's circle. The boys skipped classes, stole snacks from the school kitchen, and snuck out of the dormitories at night. Uche was their leader, and his word was law. One night, as they sat behind the dormitory, Uche lit a cigarette and passed it around. So, Nonso, he said, his voice casual but probing. What's your story? Why did your parents dump you here? Nonso hesitated, but the words spilled out before he could stop them. It's because of my mama, he said quietly. The boys leaned closer, their curiosity piqued. What about her? Uche asked, his eyes gleaming. Nonso looked at the ground. She's not my real mother, but I love her. I love her more than anything. The group erupted in laughter, but Uche silenced them with a wave of his hand. Wait, he said, his grin widening. You mean you love her? Love her? Nonso nodded, his face flushed with shame. She doesn't see me the same way though. Uche's expression turned serious. He leaned closer, his voice low and coaxing. Nonso, listen to me. If you want something, you take it. You don't wait for it to come to you. Nonso looked up, confused. What Do you mean? Uche smirked. You said she doesn't see you that way. So what? Show her who's in charge. Make her see you differently. The other boy snickered, but Nonso's heart pounded. How? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Uche leaned back, exhaling a cloud of smoke. We'll help you. We'll make sure you get your chance. But you have to be ready. The words hung in the air like a dark cloud. Nonso's mind raced. A part of him knew it was wrong, but another part, the part that longed for Amaka's love, listened. Over the next few weeks, Uche and his gang began planning. They learned Chidi's travel schedule from Nonso, who revealed that his father often went on business trips. He'll be gone for 3 days next month, Nonso said one night, his voice shaky but determined. Perfect, Uche replied, a sinister grin spreading across his face. We'll sneak out, head to your house, and make sure you get what you want. As the day approached, Nonso's nerves were on edge. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing on the edge of a cliff. But Uche's words echoed in his mind. If you want something, take it. Nonso convinced himself it was the only way to bridge the growing distance between him and Amaka. Little did he know, the path he was about to take would lead to a darkness he could never escape. Over the next few weeks, Uche and his gang devised a plan. They would sneak out of school and take Nonso back to his house on a day they knew Chidi would be away. Nonso assured them that his father often traveled for business and that Amaka would be alone. We'll hold her for you, Uche promised. All you have to do is show her who's in charge. The night of the plan, the group gathered their belongings and slipped out of the dormitories under the cover of darkness. They flagged down a public bus and began the journey to Nonso's hometown. Nonso sat quietly, his mind racing with a mix of anticipation and fear. Are you sure your dad isn't home? One of the boys asked. I'm sure, Nonso replied. He's on a trip to Abuja. He won't be back for days. When they arrived at Nonso's house, the night was still, and the moon cast pale shadows on the dusty road as Nonso and Uche's gang moved quietly, their footsteps muffled against the earth. The boys had sneaked out of the boarding school under the cover of darkness, slipping past the sleepy guards and vanishing into the night. Nonso's heart pounded with a mixture of fear and anticipation as they approached his house. When they reached the front gate, Nonso hesitated. His home, once a place of warmth and love, now stood before him like a looming shadow. Uche nudged him. This is it, Nonso. No backing out now. Nonso swallowed hard and nodded. They pushed open the gate and crept toward the front door. The faint glow of a lamp shone through the windows, and Nonso knew Amaka was still awake. He knocked softly, his hands trembling. The sound echoed in the quiet night. A moment later, the door creaked open, and Amaka appeared, her face lighting up with surprise. Nonso, she exclaimed, her voice a mix of shock and concern. Why are you home? Shouldn't you be at school? Nonso stepped inside without answering, followed closely by Uche and the others. Amaka's smile faltered as her eyes darted to the unfamiliar faces. Who are these boys? She asked, her tone growing weary. Nonso turned to her, his face cold and unrecognizable. Mama, he said flatly, I've come to finish what I started. Amaka's heart sank and her breath caught in her throat. Nonso, what are you talking about? She asked, her voice trembling. Before she could react, Uche and the others grabbed her arms, holding her tightly. Nonso, stop this! What are you doing? She screamed, struggling against their grip. Nonso stepped closer, his expression blank, but his eyes filled with a strange intensity. You always said you loved me, Mama, he said, his voice low. but you don't love me the way I want you to." Amaka's screams grew louder as the weight of his words sank in. "Nonso, no! This isn't love! I'm your mother!" she cried, her voice breaking. Nonso ignored her pleas, his hands trembling as he reached for her. Uche and the gang stood by, smirking as they held Amaka down, Nonso forcing himself on her after tearing off her dress. Her cries for help echoed through the house, desperate and filled with terror. "Nonso, please think about what you're doing," Amaka begged, tears streaming down her face. "This isn't you." But Nonso's mind was clouded, his heart twisted by years of unchecked obsession. He couldn't hear her over the roaring in his head, a storm of confusion and longing that drowned out reason. The nightmare continued until a loud knock came at the gate, startling the boys. One of the neighbors had heard Amaka's screams and alerted the police. Panicked, Uche and the others released Amaka and fled through the back door, dragging Nonso with them. Amaka collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Her body shook as she held herself, the trauma of what had just happened weighing heavily on her soul. Outside, the sound of police sirens grew louder, but for Amaka, the damage had already been done. Her once beloved stepson had crossed a line that could never be undone, and what will happen next will be way beyond anyone's comprehension. This is because what was wrong with Nonso wasn't ordinary. It was in fact a spiritual attack caused by the action of his real mother, Ugochi, a secret she died and went to the grave with. If you enjoyed the story and want to know what Ugochi's secret that's affecting her son spiritually was, and how Nonso later ended up, subscribe for part 2. Thank you.